I never imagined I'd be capable of murder until I found my wife bent over her boss's desk that Friday evening. Something in me snapped. Next thing I knew, I had him pinned against the wall, my hands squeezing his throat as Emily screamed behind me. 15 years of marriage, 2 beautiful kids, and countless memories, all destroyed in that moment. But let me start from the beginning, because the story of how my perfect life fell apart is something you need to hear. I met Emily at Starbucks in downtown Seattle back in 2009. I was 32, working as a senior software developer at a tech company, and she was 28, making the best caramel macchiatos I'd ever tasted. Every morning, her smile would brighten my day as she prepared my coffee. She always remembered my order and wrote little notes on my cup. After 2 weeks of our daily coffee interactions, she finally wrote her number instead of my name. I called her that evening, and we talked for hours about everything, from our favorite movies to our dreams and ambitions. Emily was smart, funny, and had this contagious laugh that made everyone around her smile. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant near Pike Place Market. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes perfectly. We shared a bottle of wine, and I found myself captivated by her stories about growing up in Portland and her dreams of working in marketing. The evening flew by, and before I knew it, we were walking along the waterfront, holding hands and talking about our next date. Things moved quickly after that. Within 6 months, we were practically living together. Emily landed a job at a marketing agency, and I got promoted to development team lead. We both worked hard but always made time for each other. Weekend brunches, movie nights, and spontaneous road trips to Vancouver became our thing. I proposed a year after we met, during a sunset sailing trip around Elliott Bay. She cried, said yes, and we celebrated with champagne as the Seattle skyline lit up behind us. Our wedding was small but perfect, just close friends and family at a vineyard outside the city. Emily looked breathtaking in her white dress, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive. The first few years of marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We bought a house in a nice suburb, adopted a golden retriever named Max, and started planning for our future. Emily's career was taking off. She was quickly becoming one of the agency's top account managers. I was proud of her success and supported her long hours and occasional weekend work. When Emily told me she was pregnant with Emma, it felt like our lives couldn't get any better. We transformed the guest room into a nursery, took parenting classes together, and spent countless evenings discussing names and planning for our daughter's future. Emma was born in spring 2011, and seeing Emily hold our daughter for the first time made me fall in love with her all over again. Life settled into a happy routine. Emily took 6 months of maternity leave, and we adjusted to being parents together. She was an amazing mother, patient, loving, and somehow still managing to keep up with her career. We had finally found our perfect balance. In 2013, Emily got pregnant with Jason. The pregnancy was harder this time. She had terrible morning sickness and felt constantly exhausted. I tried to help as much as I could, but with a major project at work and a toddler at home, I probably wasn't as supportive as I should have been. Jason's birth was complicated. Emily was in labor for almost 20 hours, and there were some scary moments when his heart rate dropped. When they finally handed him to us, he was perfect, but Emily wasn't the same. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. At first, I thought it was just normal exhaustion. Emily would stare at Jason for hours, not sleeping even when he was asleep. She stopped eating properly and lost too much weight too quickly. When I'd come home from work, I'd often find her sitting in the dark nursery, just holding Jason and crying silently. "I'm fine," she'd say whenever I asked what was wrong. "Just tired. You wouldn't understand." I told her to snap out of it, that she was stronger than this. God, I was such an idiot. Instead of listening, instead of really seeing her pain, I just kept telling her that other mothers handled it just fine. Emma, who was 3 at the time, started acting out because of all the tension at home. One night, after Emily had spent the whole day in bed, I found Emma trying to make herself dinner with cold cereal. That was when I finally put my foot down and told Emily she needed to pull herself together for our kids' sake. She started seeing a therapist secretly. I only found out months later when I discovered the credit card statements. When I confronted her about the hidden appointments, she broke down completely. "You made me feel so ashamed," she sobbed. "Like I was failing as a mother, as your wife." The therapist was the only one who didn't judge me. Gradually, Emily seemed to get better. She went back to work, started exercising again, and became more engaged with the kids. By the time Jason was 1, things appeared to be back to normal. We never really talked about those dark months. I convinced myself it was better to move forward and forget about it. The next few years flew by in a blur of school runs, soccer practices, and weekend barbecues. Emma started elementary school, Jason went to preschool, and Emily got promoted to senior account manager. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. But something had changed between us, something I was too blind or too stubborn to acknowledge. Looking back now, I realized that's when the first invisible wall went up between us. Every time Emily tried to talk about her feelings, I'd change the subject or tell her to focus on the positive. I thought I was being helpful, encouraging her to stay strong. Instead, I was pushing her further away, creating a distance that would eventually destroy us. By 2020, we had everything I thought made a perfect life. I was leading a development team at a major tech company. Emily was thriving in her career, and our kids were doing great in their private school. We had just finished renovating our house, adding a pool that the kids had begged for. Life looked perfect on Instagram. That summer, Emily's company hired a new CEO, David Thompson. He was brought in to expand the business, and everyone was excited about the changes he was implementing. Emily started coming home energized from work, talking about new projects and opportunities. I was happy for her. She deserved recognition for her talent. At the company's summer barbecue, I met David for the first time. He was in his mid-40s, divorced, and had this way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. I noticed how he paid special attention to Emily, praising her recent campaign in front of everyone. She was glowing under his attention, and I felt proud seeing my wife recognized for her hard work. Emma, now 9, had become quite the swimmer, and Jason, 7, was showing real talent in baseball. Our weekends were filled with their activities, and Emily never missed a single event. But I started noticing small changes in her routine. She began dressing differently for work. Nothing inappropriate, just more elegant, more polished. She joined a gym and started taking better care of herself. "You look nice," I said one morning as she was getting ready for work. She was wearing a new dress and had done something different with her hair. "Thanks," she smiled, but didn't meet my eyes in the mirror. "We have some important client meetings coming up." Those client meetings started becoming more frequent. Sometimes she'd text that she'd be home late, and I'd find her LinkedIn showed she was still active at midnight. When I'd ask about the meetings the next day, her answers were vague, distracted. One evening, I was helping Jason with his homework when Emma came into the kitchen with a puzzled look on her face. "Dad, why was Mom crying in her car?" I froze. "What do you mean, honey?" I saw her when I was playing in the front yard. She sat in her car for like 10 minutes before coming inside, and she was crying. That night, I tried to talk to Emily about it, but she brushed it off. "Just stressed about work," she said. "This big project is really demanding." She kissed me on the cheek and went to take a shower, leaving me with more questions than answers. I told myself everything was fine. Emily was just ambitious, dedicated to her career. The kids were happy, we were financially secure, and we still had our Sunday morning pancake tradition. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her staring at her phone with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between guilt and longing. The first real red flag came in October. Emily said she had to go to Chicago for a 3-day marketing conference. Everything seemed normal until I got a call from her credit card company about suspicious activity, a charge at a local mall just outside Seattle. When I mentioned it to her that evening on the phone, she quickly explained that her assistant was using her card to buy supplies for the office. I didn't think much of it until I was having lunch with Mike, my best friend from college who worked at Emily's company in a different department. "How's Emily enjoying Chicago?" I asked casually. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Chicago? The conference was canceled weeks ago because of budget cuts." My stomach dropped. I made some excuse about mixing up her schedule, but my mind was racing. That night, Emily called to tell me about the amazing presentations she'd attended. I listened to her lie with perfect confidence, describing events that never happened. The next day, I started paying more attention. Emily's company laptop was always carefully guarded now, password protected with a code I didn't know. Her phone was never left unattended, always face down when she wasn't using it. She'd even started doing her own laundry separately, something she'd never bothered with before. One Saturday morning, while Emily was at the gym, Emma came running into my home office. "Dad, look what I found in Mom's car." She held up a man's tie, navy blue with small silver dots. It was under the passenger seat. "It's probably from the dry cleaning," I said, taking the tie from her. But Emily hadn't done any dry cleaning that week, and I didn't own a tie like this. I started checking our joint credit card statements more carefully. There were regular charges at a coffee shop downtown, far from her office, always around 2 p.m. on Wednesdays. Lunch charges for two at expensive restaurants. A hotel parking garage downtown, on days when she was supposedly at client meetings in other parts of the city. Then came the moment that turned my suspicions into something more concrete. I was picking up Jason from baseball practice when I saw Emily's car in the parking lot of an upscale hotel. It was 6 p.m. on a Thursday, and she told me she was having dinner with her marketing team. I circled the block twice, telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation. That night, she came home at 9:30, smelling of wine and wearing a different blouse than she'd left in that morning. "How was the team dinner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Great. We went to that new Italian place on 5th. Another lie. I'd driven past that restaurant on my way home. It was closed for renovations. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Emily slept peacefully beside me. The woman I'd loved for 15 years, the mother of my children, was living a double life. And I was pretty sure I knew who was at the center of it. Friday evening, I decided to surprise Emily by taking her to La Maison, our favorite French restaurant where we'd celebrated every anniversary. I made reservations for 7:30, imagining how we could talk, really talk, and maybe find our way back to each other. I was willing to forgive her if she'd just be honest with me. At 6:45, I pulled into her office parking lot. Her car was still there, one of the few vehicles remaining. I texted her. No response. Called her, straight to voicemail. A knot formed in my stomach as I took the elevator to the 12th floor. The office was dark and quiet. Walking past the cubicles, I noticed a light coming from David's corner office. As I got closer, I heard sounds that made my blood run cold. Then I heard Emily's laugh. That same laugh that had made me fall in love with her at Starbucks all those years ago. Through the glass wall of David's office, I saw them. Emily was bent over his desk, her skirt hitched up, while David stood behind her, his hands gripping her hips. The sight burned into my brain like a hot iron. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, countless memories, all destroyed in this one moment. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember crossing the room. The next thing I knew, I had David pinned against the wall, my forearm pressed against his throat. Emily was screaming, trying to pull me off him. Papers from the desk scattered across the floor, along with David's expensive fountain pen that he always bragged about. "You come into my house," I growled, pressing harder. "You smile at my children. You destroy my family." David's face was turning red, his eyes wide with fear. "Please stop." Emily was pulling at my arm. "You're going to kill him." I released him, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Emily rushed to help him, and that sight, her choosing him even now, made something snap inside me. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" David was still coughing, straightening his disheveled clothes. Emily stood between us, mascara running down her face. "Tom, please, I can explain." "Explain? Explain?" My voice echoed through the empty office. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months? Explain how you could do this to our children. Don't bring the kids into this," Emily pleaded. "Why not? You already did when you decided to destroy their family." David finally found his voice. "Listen, man, let's talk about this rationally." I picked up his precious fountain pen from the floor and snapped it in half, letting the pieces fall at his feet. "You don't talk. You don't get to say anything. You're going to stay away from my wife, my children, my family." "Or what?" David straightened up, trying to regain his authority. "You're going to assault me again? I could have you arrested." I laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Go ahead. Call the police. I'm sure they'd be very interested in how you're using company resources for your affairs. How many other employees have you seduced, David?" His face paled. Emily was sobbing now, her perfect makeup completely ruined, her carefully styled hair a mess. All I could think about was how many times she dressed up for him, while I sat at home with our children, trusting her, believing in her. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at Mike's place while Emily remained at home with the kids. I couldn't face them yet. How do you tell your children that their mother has destroyed everything they knew? Mike's wife Sarah brought me clean clothes and updates about the kids, reporting that Emma was asking questions while Jason had become unusually quiet. The story spread through Emily's office like wildfire. By Monday morning, everyone knew. Mike told me that David had shown up with a bruised neck, claiming he'd had a gym accident. He also filed a formal complaint against me with building security, but mysteriously withdrew it the same day. Later, I found out that several other female employees had come forward with their own stories about David's special mentoring. Emily called and texted constantly. Please, let me explain. We need to talk about the kids. It's not what you think. I blocked her number after the first day. All communication went through Sarah, who had taken charge of coordinating the kids' schedules. On Tuesday evening, I met with a divorce attorney. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who had seen it all. You have a strong case, she said, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. The hotel receipts, credit card statements, witness accounts, it's more than enough. But the kids complicate things. Wednesday night, I finally went home to talk to Emma and Jason. Emily had agreed to stay at her sister's place. Sarah sat with the kids while I packed some of Emily's things, finding items I'd never seen before, expensive lingerie hidden in the back of drawers, a burner phone taped under her dresser. Then came the hardest conversation of my life. Emma, perceptive as always, spoke first. Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced? I sat them both down on the couch, fighting back tears. Yes, sweetheart. Your mom and we're going to live separately for a while. Because she has a boyfriend? Emma's direct question hit me like a punch to the gut. I saw her kissing Mr. Thompson in his car last month. I didn't tell you because she said it was a secret. Jason burst into tears. Is it my fault? Because I'm bad at baseball? I pulled them both into a tight hug. None of this is your fault. Sometimes adults make bad choices that hurt people they love. But I promise you, both of you, that I will always be here. Nothing will ever change how much I love you. That night, after they went to bed, I found Emma's diary on the kitchen counter, deliberately left open. She had written, I hate Mom for hurting Dad. I hate Mr. Thompson for ruining our family. But mostly I hate that nothing will ever be the same again. Reading those words, something hardened inside me. Emily hadn't just betrayed me. She'd betrayed our children's trust in the world. She'd taught them that love isn't reliable, that promises can be broken, that secrets can destroy families. A week after the incident, Mike came to me with information that made my blood boil. He'd done some digging and discovered that David and Emily had been planning to relocate to the New York office together. There were already apartment listings in their shared email drafts and school research for Emma and Jason. They were going to take my kids away. There's more, Mike said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photos of Emily and David at various restaurants, hotels, even a jewelry store. Sarah hired a private investigator 3 months ago when she first suspected something was wrong. She didn't know how to tell you. The photos were dated, documenting their affair like a twisted timeline. One showed them shopping for furniture for their secret apartment, I realized. Another caught them having lunch with what looked like a real estate agent. The most recent ones were from just days before I caught them, showing Emily and David looking at rings. I took the evidence to my lawyer, who immediately filed for emergency custody. They were planning to kidnap your children, she said firmly. No judge will look kindly on that. Emily's response was desperate. She showed up at Mike's house at midnight, pounding on the door, demanding to see me. When I refused, she broke down on the front lawn, screaming that she was sorry, that she'd made a terrible mistake. Mike's neighbors called the police. The next day, I received an email from David's wife, his current wife, as it turned out. They weren't divorced as he'd claimed. Linda Thompson had quite a story to tell. This wasn't David's first affair with an employee, but it was his most elaborate plan yet. He'd done this before, seduced ambitious women, promised them a new life, then discarded them when he got bored. He's a predator, Linda wrote. He targets women who are vulnerable, makes them feel special, then uses them for his entertainment. I've stayed because of our children, but I've documented everything. I'll testify if you need me to. When I forwarded Linda's email to Emily, her response was immediate. She wanted to meet, to explain everything. Against my better judgment, I agreed to talk at a public coffee shop, with Mike nearby just in case. Emily looked terrible. She'd lost weight. Her eyes were red from crying. She started talking the moment I sat down, words pouring out like a broken dam. How David had noticed her postpartum depression story in her file. How he'd gained her trust by sharing his own family struggles. How he'd made her feel understood for the first time since Jason's birth. He said, "You never really loved me," she sobbed. That a man who truly loved his wife would have noticed her depression, would have helped her instead of telling her to get over it. He made everything I'd felt, every doubt I'd ever had, seem justified. I listened silently. Watching this woman I thought I knew so well fall apart in front of me. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to say we could work through this. But then I thought of Emma's diary, of Jason's tears, of the apartment listings and school research in New York. The divorce proceedings became uglier than I expected. Despite the overwhelming evidence against her, Emily fought for joint custody. Her lawyer painted me as controlling and aggressive, using the confrontation with David as proof. But Linda Thompson's testimony changed everything. Linda brought evidence of David's pattern, emails, photos, and testimonies from 3 other women he'd manipulated in different companies. She revealed how he used corporate resources to fund his affairs, including the apartment Emily and I had discovered. His business trips were actually romantic getaways with various women, all paid for with company money. The scandal exploded. The company's board launched an investigation, and David was suspended pending its outcome. Emily, suddenly realizing how thoroughly she'd been manipulated, had a complete breakdown during a custody hearing. She admitted everything. Their plans to take the kids to New York, the secret apartment, even to burn her phone she'd used to communicate with David. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she told the judge, "but please don't take my children away completely. They're my whole world." The judge was sympathetic but firm. Given the attempted kidnapping plans, he awarded me primary custody. Emily got supervised visitation rights, pending completion of therapy and counseling. She also had to inform the court before traveling anywhere with the kids. The children's reactions to the custody arrangement were mixed. Emma refused to stay at Emily's new apartment, while Jason agreed to supervise weekend visits. My daughter had become fiercely protective of me, while my son still desperately wanted his mother's love and approval. One evening, after a particularly difficult therapy session with the kids, I ran into Sarah at the grocery store. She'd been divorced from Mike for 2 years, and her advice had been invaluable throughout this ordeal. "You know what the hardest part is?" she said as we grabbed coffee afterward. "Learning to trust again. Not just other people, but yourself. Your own judgment." She was right. Every time I thought about dating again, I remembered how blind I'd been to Emily's deception. How I'd missed all the signs, ignored my instincts, failed to see what was happening right in front of me. The company's investigation concluded with both David and Emily being terminated. David's wife filed for divorce, armed with evidence of his multiple affairs. Emily, now unemployed and living in a small apartment, started sending lengthy emails about redemption and second chances. "I threw away everything that mattered," she wrote. "I let him convince me that his fantasy was better than our reality. I didn't realize that what I had, our family, our life, our love, was real, while everything he promised was just an illusion." I read her emails but rarely responded. Instead, I focused on rebuilding our children's sense of security. We established new routines: Friday movie nights, Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday bike rides. Slowly, our home began to feel whole again, even with one person missing. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah and I started spending more time together. It wasn't planned. We just found ourselves talking for hours after school events or therapy sessions. She understood what I was going through in a way no one else could. Maybe it was because we'd both been betrayed, or maybe it was just her natural ability to listen without judgment. Our first unofficial date happened when we took Emma and Jason to the zoo. Sarah's kids were with their father that weekend, and she offered to help me wrangle my 2 energetic children. Watching her help Jason read the information plaques about animals, seeing how naturally she connected with Emma, I felt something I thought I'd never feel again: hope. The way she knew exactly how to engage with both kids made me realize how much we'd all been missing. But my past haunted me. The first time Sarah stayed for dinner, I found myself checking her phone when she left it on the counter. I immediately felt disgusted with myself. When she suggested meeting for coffee near her office, my mind instantly flashed to all those coffee shop charges on Emily's credit card statements. One evening, after I canceled our plans because she had a late meeting at work, the same excuse Emily had used so many times, Sarah showed up at my door with takeout and a determined look on her face. "We need to talk about this," she said, setting the food on the kitchen counter. "I know what you're doing, Tom. I've been there." "I don't know what you mean." I tried to deflect, but she wasn't having it. "You're looking for signs of betrayal everywhere. I saw how you tensed up when my phone buzzed during dinner last week. How you get quiet whenever I mention work events. How did you know?" I asked, finally admitting to my behavior. "Because I spent 2 years doing the same thing," she smiled sadly. "Checking phones, analyzing innocent comments, looking for betrayal around every corner. It's exhausting, and it's no way to live." That night, we had a long conversation about trust and healing. Sarah shared stories about her own journey after her divorce, how she'd had to learn to trust not just others, but herself again. "But at some point," she said, taking my hand across the table, "you have to decide if you're going to let your past trauma control your future. Emily betrayed you. It was horrible and unfair, and it left scars. But I'm not Emily, and you're not the same person who missed those signs." Things came to a head during our movie night. Sarah got a text that made her smile, and without thinking, I asked, "Who is it?" The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Sarah looked at me for a long moment, then wordlessly handed me her phone. It was a funny meme from her sister. I felt ashamed and grateful at the same time, ashamed of my suspicion, grateful for her understanding. That night, after she left, I sat down with Emma and Jason for a serious conversation. They were old enough to understand, and they deserved to know if something was changing in our lives. "How would you feel if Sarah and I started dating officially?" I asked them. Emma considered this carefully. "Does she make you happy, Dad?" "Yes," I answered honestly. "But you and Jason come first." "Always." "I like Sarah," Jason said quietly. "She doesn't try to replace Mom, but she's nice to us. And she comes to my games even when it's cold." Emma nodded. "Mom hurt you really bad, Dad. But Sarah's different. We can all see it. She doesn't lie or make excuses. She's just real." A year after the divorce, I received an email from Emily. She'd moved to Chicago, started therapy, and gotten a new job. She wrote about her regrets, her shame, and her hopes to rebuild some kind of relationship with our children. David, as it turned out, had moved on to another company and another affair. The fantasy life he'd promised had vanished like smoke. I showed the email to Sarah before responding. She'd become my sounding board, my voice of reason. "She's their mother," Sarah said simply. "They need her in their lives, even if it's different now." Emily's therapy seemed to be working. During her supervised visits, she was more present with the kids than she'd been in years. She didn't make excuses for her actions or try to blame others. Instead, she focused on rebuilding trust with Emma and Jason, one small step at a time. Emma eventually agreed to spend occasional weekends at Emily's new apartment. Jason's baseball games became neutral ground where we could all be present without tension. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the anger and pain that had consumed us all a year ago. Sarah and I took things slow, but steady. Our kids got along well, creating a chaotic but loving blended family during our shared weekends. We talked openly about our fears and insecurities, turning our past traumas into stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. Last week, I found Emma looking through old family photos. There was one of Emily and me on our wedding day, both of us beaming at the camera. "Do you ever wish things had been different, Dad?" she asked. I sat down beside her, choosing my words carefully. "I wish your mom hadn't made the choices she did. I wish you and Jason hadn't been hurt. But life isn't about wishing for different pasts. It's about creating better futures." She leaned against my shoulder, just like she used to when she was little. "I'm glad you found Sarah," she said softly. "And I'm glad Mom is getting better." That evening, as Sarah and I watched all 4 kids playing in the backyard, Emma teaching her daughter soccer, Jason and her son arguing about video games, I realized something profound. Sometimes life's worst moments lead us exactly where we need to be. The path isn't what we expected, but the destination feels right. Emily's betrayal had shattered my world, but from those pieces, we'd all built something new. Not perfect, not unmarked by the past, but stronger in the broken places. And maybe that's what real love is. Not the fairy tale I thought I had, but the honest, hard-won trust that Sarah and I share. What are you thinking about? Sarah asked, noticing my contemplative mood. Just that I'm grateful, I replied, taking her hand. For everything, even the bad parts. They led me here. She squeezed my hand, understanding without needing more words. That's the difference between fantasy and reality. One promises perfection, the other offers something far more valuable: truth.